They say you don't really own land in Texas. Land owns you. It climbs into your boots, sinks into your sweat, and lingers in your bloodline long after the title deed fades. I'm Clint Morgan, and the stretch of earth I walk every morning has been Morgan land since my granddad traded his last war bond for 80 rocky acres and a broke-down tractor in 1952. We're not weekend homesteaders or farmhouse aesthetic folks. With monogrammed chicken coops, we raise beef, we haul hay, we patch fences with baling wire and prayers. My alarm clock doesn't beep, it moves, and that's how I like it. Every day begins the same. 5:30 a.m. black coffee in a thermos older than my truck, my dog Boots pacing ahead of me, tail high, like he owns the place, which, honestly, he might. The air's thick with mesquite and diesel and the low hum of something alive. To outsiders, it's noise and smell. To me, it's the sound of inheritance. My father, Hank Morgan, used to say, "The cattle don't care how tired you are, neither does the land. You show up or you lose it." I've lived by that rule longer than I've lived by any posted speed limit. For most of my life, the ranch and the community got along just fine. Folks waved from pickups, swapped pecan pies during holidays, and showed up with jumper cables or casseroles when you needed them. We weren't Mayberry, but we were decent. That changed 3 years ago when a development company out of Austin bulldozed the brushland south of my east pasture and installed 54 cookie-cutter homes so beige they made drywall look exciting. They called it Cedar Grove Estates. I called it HOA. Every house came with a vinyl fence, a smart mailbox, and a HOA handbook thicker than a King James Bible, but twice as judgmental. At first, I didn't care. Let folks live where they went, plant their tulips in rows, and name their labradoodles after wine varietals. As long as they stayed on their side of the fence, I stayed on mine. But something felt off the day the Cedar Grove HOA Rules Enforced sign popped up, leaning 6 inches over into my land, by the way, and someone knocked over my mailbox because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. I replaced it with a welded steel box shaped like a longhorn skull. Call it my welcome gift. Then came the flyers. Polite at first, friendly reminder, please be mindful of noise and odor during early hours. One even had a clippered cow on it. Cute. That turned into emails, then phone calls, then a letter from someone calling herself president of Cedar Grove HOA Enforcement. The woman hadn't been in town long enough to know the difference between a manure pile and a mesquite stump, but she'd read enough bylaws to believe she ran the place. And that, my friend, is where our little HOA horror story begins. Now, I've dealt with a fair share of city folks who thought fresh air came in aerosol cans, but nothing prepared me for the arrival of Samantha Doyle. She showed up one Tuesday afternoon like the villain in a made-for-TV movie. Pastel blouse, high-waisted slacks, heels stabbing into the gravel like she was punishing it for being rural. Her SUV was still running in my driveway, air conditioning full blast, like she thought this was going to be a quick little chat where I'd smile, nod, and apologize for being alive. She had a clipboard tucked under one arm like it was a holy relic, and she wore the exact kind of expression you see on a yoga instructor who just stepped in something organic. "Mr. Morgan," she called out like she was about to issue a parking ticket instead of walking to a metaphorical barbed wire fence. "Clint Morgan, owner of Morgan Hill Ranch." I wiped sweat off my brow, leaned on the gate, and gave her a nod. "That's me. And you are—" She extended a hand like she expected a photo op. "Samantha Doyle. I'm the president of the Cedar Grove HOA. She said it like she was announcing a royal title, as if I was supposed to curtsy. "I just wanted to touch base regarding some growing concerns from our community members." Now, I've been around long enough to know that when someone says concerns, what they really mean is thinly disguised threats. Sure enough, she opened the clipboard with a flourish like Vanna White revealing a vowel and started listing items like she was reading a Yelp review for a petting zoo from hell. There've been multiple complaints about tractor noise before sunrise, strong animal odors drifting into living areas, and several reports of uncontained animal waste near the shared perimeter. She emphasized uncontained, like I was flinging manure across property lines with a catapult. I let out a chuckle that was about 60% annoyance and 40% disbelief. "Ma'am, we run cattle here. This isn't a petting zoo. There are no diaper stations for bulls." She didn't laugh, not even a blink, just that tight, polite smile that made me want to check if her face had a factory reset button. "We understand this land has history, Mr. Morgan," she said, flipping to a color-coded page. God help me. The woman used highlighters. But Cedar Grove is a family-first neighborhood, and several residents are concerned about the impact of your operations on property values and child safety. That last part caught my attention. Child safety? I repeated. Are you suggesting cows are out here mugging toddlers? No, of course not, she said quickly, then paused as if realizing she had wandered too far into cow-based slander. But unregulated livestock activity near a residential area does create a potential hazard. Our legal committee is exploring a review with the county zoning board. That was the moment the tone shifted. This wasn't a neighborly complaint about smell or sound anymore. This was a surgical strike dressed up in suburban small talk. I took a step forward and met her eyes. Let me be crystal clear, Ms. Doyle. This ranch has been operating legally since long before your HOA handbook existed. You all moved next to a working cattle operation, not the other way around. She jotted something down like she was documenting my resistance for a future tribunal. Still, she added, closing the folder with a snap, we believe a formal petition will help clarify any zoning ambiguities. We're optimistic about a cooperative resolution. And just like that, she turned and click-clacked her way back to the SUV, kicking up a puff of dust that Boots immediately peed on, like a living Yelp review of his own. I watched her drive off, her taillights disappearing past the mesquite trees that marked the boundary between civilization and reality. That night, I found a folded flyer stuck between my gateposts in bold font. Help us make Cedar Grove safe for families. Say no to agricultural encroachment. It had a stock photo of a child holding their nose and a silhouette of a cow with devil horns. Cute. They just declared war, and they hadn't even seen what I was keeping in the old tack room out back. I figured the flyer was just an overzealous attempt at passive aggression. Maybe a few busybodies wanted to feel important between Pilates and HOA potlucks, but by Friday, things escalated faster than a squirrel on espresso. I started noticing unfamiliar cars creeping past my gate at walking speed, windows half down, camera phones pointing directly at my barn like I was running an illegal livestock rave. One parked across the road for a good 20 minutes, drone buzzing overhead like a fat mosquito that had just graduated law school. I thought about shooting it down, but settled for a slow cowboy wave and a middle finger. Then came the Facebook group. One of my buddies from town, he used to install ceiling fans and gossip harder than a beauty salon, texted me, "Yo, Clint, check Cedar Grove Safe Family Watch. You're famous." I borrowed my niece's tablet and logged in through a dummy account I hadn't touched since that one year I coached Little League. The page was everything I expected, stock sunset photos, HOA meeting reminders, and then there I was, or rather parts of me. A zoomed-in picture of my rusted water trough with a filter slapped on it to make it look post-apocalyptic. Caption, contaminated runoff, threat to child health, should we wait for tragedy? Another one showed me driving my tractor at dawn. Caption, 6:02 a.m.e. But my favorite, if you could call it that, was a blurry shot of my fence line with a bright red arrow digitally added pointing toward my pasture. The caption read, according to open satellite maps, part of this land isn't even zoned for livestock. Is this legal? Is this safe? The comments were a feeding frenzy of suburban melodrama. One woman said her baby coughed for 2 days after they walked past the field. Another claimed her Shih Tzu developed anxiety from hearing cows bellow. My personal favorite, this isn't agriculture, this is agro-terrorism. I should have laughed, and for a while I did, until I started seeing the shift in the people who actually lived near me. The Thompsons, who I'd helped pull out of a ditch during last winter's ice storm, stopped waving. Someone built a privacy fence on the south edge that faced inward, like they were afraid of catching bovine cooties. Martha, across the creek, who used to bring me sweet tea when I was fixing the tractor, stopped answering my calls. It was like someone had handed out HOA-flavored Kool-Aid and half the neighborhood took a sip. That Monday, the real slap came. I opened the mailbox and found a fat envelope with more legal jargon than a courtroom script. The return address, Doyle and Madsen, attorneys at law. Because, of course, Samantha had a law firm in her back pocket. Inside was a 6-page letter citing environmental statutes, zoning codes, and something called a residential nuisance threshold. Half of it read like it had been Googled the night before and stapled together over wine. But the kicker was the closing paragraph. Failure to comply with regulatory expectations may result in formal complaints to the county board and potential forced compliance measures, including, but not limited to, temporary injunctions, zoning review hearings, or ordered cessation of operations in the disputed impact zone. Disputed impact zone. They were referring to my cattle pens, the same ones my grandfather built by hand with rebar and sweat and enough concrete to sink a Prius. I stared at that phrase like it was written in a foreign language, maybe HOA Latin. That night, I sat at my desk, boots still dusty, hat on the hook, legal letter spread beside a cold plate of leftover brisket. Boots lay snoring under the table like this was just another Tuesday. But I knew better. Samantha wasn't just filing noise complaints anymore. She was building a paper trail, one lined with drones, doctored Facebook posts, and legalese so thick it'd clog a city sewer. And while I was still processing that, I found something in the tack room that would flip this HOA circus on its head. No, not a chainsaw or a shotgun. Something quieter, something stronger. Tucked behind a box of horse liniment and old oil rags, in a rusty file drawer that hadn't been opened since Bush was governor, was a map, a very old map. The map was hand-drawn, aged to a soft yellow, and smelled like tobacco dust and legacy. It was rolled around a cardboard core and tied with twine, my grandfather's version of a vault. On the corner in faded black ink were the words, Morgan Hill Ranch Survey, 1971, certified. The map was detailed in a way modern surveyors rarely bother with: tree lines, cattle paths, water flow arrows, even a small X where Granddad used to hang the deer feeder. More importantly, it had one very specific dotted line labeled Shared Easement Access, Conditional Use Only. I unfolded it on my kitchen table next to Samantha's threat letter, and the pieces started clicking together like barbed wire on a bad day. That night, I kept digging. I found another manila folder, brittle and full of letters, some typed, some handwritten, all addressed to and from the county clerk's office over the course of 3 decades. And in the middle, stapled to a letter dated April 1995, was the crown jewel, conditional easement agreement between Grayson County and Morgan Hill Ranch. According to it, my grandfather had agreed to allow a portion of the southeast boundary to be accessible by the county for potential future development, but with one critical clause underlined in pen: any permanent infrastructure constructed that impedes or disrupts active agricultural use shall result in immediate revocation of easement and reversion of said land to the original landholder. In simpler terms, if someone built anything on that strip of land that interfered with ranch operations, the deal was off and the land was ours again. And guess where Cedar Grove HOA decided to place their precious little clubhouse, complete with solar, fairy lights, pergola, and a cement parking lot? That's right, slap in the middle of my grandfather's claws. Still, I needed proof, the kind that holds up in court, not just in a dusty kitchen under LED lighting and emotional bias. So I called a man I hadn't spoken to in years, Walt Reyes, retired county surveyor and the kind of guy who measures twice, then sues 3 times if you doubt him. Walt had the personality of a sour pickle and the accuracy of a laser. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. I sent him the easement doc, the 1971 map, and a few satellite screenshots. His response came in under 10 minutes: be there Tuesday, bring coffee. When Tuesday came, Walt showed up in a faded red pickup that looked like it had survived 3 wars and a divorce. He wore a khaki vest with 47 pockets and a hat that said, "Trust the lines." We walked the perimeter, Walt reading off GPS coordinates like a human Google Maps. He grunted a lot, cussed under his breath more than once, and finally drove 4 orange survey stakes into the ground right through the clubhouse parking lot. "They're not just over the line," he muttered. "They're 28 feet inside your damn property, and that's just the front corner." I asked him if it would hold in court. Walt snorted. "Clint, I'll testify in Latin if that's what it takes. Hell, I'll even wear a tie. This is a textbook easement breach. You could charge them toll fees for every PTA meeting they've had here." And that was the moment it clicked. Not just that I could fight back, but that I could win. Not through yelling or online rants, but with a document written by a man who built fences by hand and knew someone would eventually try to cross one. Spent the rest of the day scanning every paper, photographing every stake, and emailing them all to Amy Crenshaw, my attorney and fellow rural troublemaker. She called me back 2 hours later. "Clint," she said, voice halfway between a smirk and a verdict, "you're sitting on a legal gold mine. If they don't move their clubhouse, they're trespassing, and if they do move it, they're admitting guilt. Either way, they pay. I looked out the window at their shiny HOA building, built on my land, funded by monthly dues and suburban audacity. Then I looked down at the easement paper, now laminated and sitting next to a mug of reheated coffee. By the time Amy finished outlining my options, I wasn't just holding legal leverage. I was holding the equivalent of a flaming branding iron with their logo etched into it. I didn't need to threaten them with court. I could rent them their own mistake, and something about that felt poetic. So I did what any stubborn rancher with a fax machine and a chip on his shoulder would do. I drafted an invoice. I called it an access utilization agreement, though Amy insisted I put private land use fee in the header to make it sound less like a hostage note and more like what it was, rent. I calculated fair market value for commercial access, applied it to the square footage of the clubhouse, parking lot, and entry drive, then rounded it to a friendly neighborhood rate of $700, 0 cents a month per household. 52 homes, you do the math, I did. It was enough to buy a new hay baler and pay off the old barn roof. Twice. I printed 52 certified letters, each with a cover page stating, "This correspondence is a courtesy notification regarding usage of private land currently in breach of easement terms, pursuant to the 1995 agreement on file with Grayson County. Continued usage without agreement constitutes trespass." I even included satellite photos with Walt's GPS overlay, the easement clause highlighted in neon pink, and a tear-off stub for check payments, just in case anyone was feeling neighborly. I mailed them on a Wednesday. By Friday, my phone sounded like a broken alarm clock from hell. First came the voicemails. Samantha's voice bouncing between saccharine and screechy. One message hissed, "You can't charge rent for land we've been using for years." The next, "This is extortion, Clint. We have lawyers too." I ignored them all. Instead, I posted a single sign at the edge of the disputed zone. Private property. Access by agreement only. Trespassers will be invoiced. Yes, we're serious. That weekend, a few HOA members trickled down to my fence line trying everything from fake politeness to desperate reasoning. One guy in golf shorts offered to mediate if I lowered the monthly fee. A woman named Leslie brought banana bread and asked if $200, 0 cents a month, could buy forgiveness. I told her the banana bread was dry and the fence line wasn't for negotiating. I wasn't angry anymore. I was billing. Old, calm, quiet building, and I knew exactly how it would land. Because HOA Karen didn't just want control, she wanted submission. And nothing breaks a suburban warlord like a rancher charging her HOA for the right to park in a lot she never really owned. They'd use bylaws and gossip. I used a deed and a spreadsheet. No yelling, no Facebook rants, no HOA subcommittees, just pure Texas-style logic. Use my land, pay your rent. By Monday, I'd received my first 3 checks, each one hand-delivered with a half-hearted apology scribbled in the memo line. I cashed them all before noon, and I wasn't even halfway done. The moment those first 3 checks cleared, the temperature inside Cedar Grove shot up 10 degrees, not because of the Texas sun, but because the HOA just realized their queen was building sandcastles on someone else's beach. Word spread fast. By Wednesday, my mailbox was a revolving door of letters, inquiries, and a few less than polite notes written in aggressive cursive. One resident sent me a card that read, "This is not how community works," which I found ironic considering the community apparently thought drone surveillance and legal threats were a fine way to welcome a neighbor. Inside the HOA, cracks began to show. Samantha tried to hold a Zoom meeting, but someone leaked it. My friend Jack sent me a screen recording. It looked like a hostage negotiation mixed with a neighborhood garage sale argument. One guy, Bradley Jensen, the HOA treasurer, asked point blank, "Did you know the clubhouse was built on Clint's land?" Samantha froze like a deer at a gun range. "That's complicated," she mumbled, and then dodged the next 5 questions like a politician with a PR firm. Bradley wasn't having it. He dropped a bomb. "I'm looking through the ledger, and I don't see any vote authorizing legal counsel, PR consultants, or mailers at over $9,000, 0 cents of HOA funds with no recorded approval." Cue digital chaos. Screens flickering, muted mics unmuting in fury, people yelling over their kids and wine glasses. Samantha tried to regain control, but she was sinking faster than a lawn chair in soggy pasture. The residents started asking real questions. Why weren't they told about the easement clause? Why had they paid dues toward a building that might be illegal? Why were they being invoiced by a rancher instead of protected by their HOA? The following Saturday, the HOA scheduled an emergency in-person meeting at the very clubhouse in question. I got wind of it from one of my more talkative tenants, a guy named Ken, who now paid his rent on time and wanted no part of a lawsuit. He said, "Man, they're putting up folding chairs and trying to calm folks down, but it's a full-blown HOA mutiny." Naturally, I showed up. Picture it. 47 residents stuffed into a beige box of a room with bad fluorescent lighting, faces flushed, arms crossed, HOA-branded binders clutched like emotional support animals. At the front stood Samantha, blouse wrinkled, hair fraying at the edges, clicking through a half-baked PowerPoint labeled "Our Legal Options." Bullet point 1, refuting easement validity. Bullet point 2, community unity and positive messaging. I didn't say a word until the third bullet point appeared, Clint Morgan's demands, how to push back. That's when I strode to the front, set a folder on the table, and nodded at the screen like I was about to fix a broken tractor. "You want to talk legal options?" I asked calmly. "Let's start with facts." I opened the folder and laid out the certified survey from Walt Reyes, the easement agreement from 1995, and a notarized letter from the county clerk confirming the clause was valid and enforceable. I handed out linen copies of my new access agreement, printed in full color for flair. Then I looked the room over. "You've got two options," I said. "You can sign this agreement and keep access to the road and clubhouse for $500, 0 cents a month, neighbor discount included, or we can take this to court where I win and you pay more plus damages." Silence. Someone coughed. Samantha blinked like her Wi-Fi cut out. Then a voice from the back, old lady, HOA pin still on her lapel, spoke. "I'd rather pay Clint than another lawyer." Chuckles, then nods. Samantha stepped forward, shaking with that mix of rage and desperation only a Karen backed into a legal corner can manage. "This is extortion," she snapped. I smiled. "No, Samantha, extortion is threatening to shut down a ranch because cows exist. What I'm doing is property management." She didn't respond. She just stormed out, binder in hand, and the door slammed like the final act in a bad community theater play. The rest of the meeting, quiet murmurs, some hesitant signatures, and a few side glances that said, "How did we let this happen?" By the next Monday, Samantha Doyle was no longer listed as president of the Cedar Grove HOA. Her glossy headshot disappeared from the website, her name scrubbed from newsletters, and her community updates Facebook videos quietly deleted like they'd never existed. No dramatic farewell, no tearful resignation letter, just poof, gone. Rumor had it she moved back to Dallas and was now renting a third-floor condo with no view, no yard, and, most poetically, no HOA. I didn't ask for confirmation. Some endings are better left quiet and pitiful. In her place, the residents elected Susan Marks, a second-grade teacher with a practical haircut and a voice that could silence an entire room of screaming 7-year-olds. She came to my ranch in person, no clipboard, no condescension. Just a thermos of decent coffee and a notebook full of questions. "Clint," she said, "we just want to fix this. We didn't move here to fight with the land. We moved here to live beside it. Can we start over?" That line hit me harder than I expected. I leaned back in my chair, looked at Boots asleep under the table, and said, "Start with honesty, Susan. Then maybe I'll share my brisket recipe." Over the next few weeks, we drafted a new agreement, not a one-sided lease, but a two-way understanding. Each household would contribute $250, 0 cents/month for continued access to the road, parking lot, and shared clubhouse. Money split evenly, half for ranch maintenance around a shared zone, half for HOA community improvements. I even suggested adding a clause about neighborly communication just to make the lawyers twitch. We added a line that made me chuckle every time I reread it. In the event of a dispute, parties agreed to resolve matters over coffee before court. With that out of the way, Susan pitched something unexpected. "What if we hosted a ranch day?" she asked. "You know, bring the community together. Let people see what you actually do out here, feed the cows, walk the land, maybe even pet a goat." I raised an eyebrow. "We don't do petting goats around here, but I'll roast a brisket." Her eyes lit up. "Even better." We planned it for a Saturday in late spring. I cleared out the north pasture, power washed the cattle gates, and hung some old string lights across the pecan trees near the hay barn. Susan rallied the neighborhood, folding chairs, covered dishes, lemonade stands, and a couple of pop-up tents in case Texas decided to act like Texas, and built a hay bale seating area, set up the small pen for the kids to meet the calves, supervised, of course, and cleaned Boots up so he wouldn't scare anyone with too much authentic ranch aroma. When ranch day came, I'll admit, I didn't expect much, maybe a few brave families and a handful of looky-loos, but over 120 people showed up. Kids who once shrieked at the sound of cows now begged for pony rides. Adults who'd once called me a nuisance were now gathered around my smoker asking about rubs, woods, and cook times like I was the mayor of Meattown. One of the HOA board members asked me if I sold beef directly, 2 briskets a month and the occasional ribeye, I replied. He Venmo'd me on the spot. Susan introduced me before dinner with a small speech. Clint Morgan isn't just a neighbor, he's a part of this land's story. And it's about time we stopped trying to rewrite it. I tipped my hat and said just one thing. My granddad always told me, it's easy to argue with someone when you've never sat at their table. So thank y'all for showing up and for not bringing any clipboards. The crowd laughed. Genuinely, no sarcasm, no tension, just folks enjoying smoked meat, cold drinks, and a sunset that didn't care about bylaws. For the first time in months, the fence line didn't feel like a battlefront. It felt like a porch, and it was just getting started. A month after Ranch Day, Cedar Grove didn't just look different. It sounded different. The passive-aggressive silence had faded. No more whispers about the cattle guy or sideways glances when I walked into the co-op. People waved again. Kids rode bikes past my pasture and shouted, "Hi, Mr. Clint," like I was a character in a Pixar movie. One little girl even asked if Boots could come to her birthday party. He did decline respectfully. Too much frosting. The HOA, now under Susan's steady hand, actually became tolerable. They held quarterly meetings that started on time, kept under an hour, and, best of all, didn't include any item labeled agricultural concerns. Instead, they discussed sidewalk cracks, community gardens, and fundraising for a new swing set. Turns out, when you're not burning HOA money on PR consultants and legal threats, you can actually buy a decent playground. As for me, well, I didn't just rebuild my fence. I upgraded it. That HOA access money, it funded a cedar split rail perimeter with steel posts and mesh lining strong enough to hold back a freight train, or at least a determined labradoodle. I even repaved the southern trail, added solar lights, and ran new water lines to the calf pen, courtesy of suburban rent, I called it. Every time I cash those monthly checks, I smile, not because of the money, but because I know they come printed on HOA letterhead. There's poetry in that. Now, let's talk about Samantha Doyle. You'd think she'd fade into obscurity like a bad Yelp reviewer, but nope. Karen energy doesn't just disappear, it metastasizes. See, someone leaked the Zoom recording of that infamous HOA meltdown and got picked up by a local satire page called Suburbgeddon. Within days, clips of Samantha screaming, "This is extortion," over my survey documents were turned into memes. My personal favorite, her face superimposed over a Monopoly board with the caption, "You landed on Clint's land. Pay rent or go to court." It went viral enough that someone printed it on T-shirts and started selling them at the feed store. I didn't ask for a cut. I just asked for one in XL. Even better, a group of Cedar Grove teens formed a lawn mowing side hustle called No Karen's Own Landscaping. Their slogan, "We trim grass, not property rights." You can't make this stuff up, and honestly, you shouldn't. Reality's doing just fine. 6 months after the dust settled, I got invited to speak at the Texas Cattlemen's Association Summit. Meet Clint Morgan, a man whose idea of public speaking used to be yelling at a stubborn gate latch. But there I was, standing in front of 100 ranchers in cowboy hats and bolo ties, giving a talk titled, "Turning HOA Drama into Passive Income." The crowd loved it. Amy Crenshaw, my attorney, even suggested we turn my case into a template for other rural landowners. "Clint," she said, "you may have just created the first HOA-proof fence in history." I closed my speech with the same words I'd engraved on the custom steel sign now posted beside the shared gravel road. "Private access, Dalton land. Trespassers will be invoiced." And right underneath it, a brass plaque with just 3 words, "Know your boundaries." That's the lesson, isn't it? In a world where paper beats principle more often than it should, you better make damn sure your paperwork is older, thicker, and meaner than theirs. Because people will always try to redraw your lines, to stretch the rules, bend the truth, push their fences into your field, not with tractors or tools, but with bylaws, fine print, and a smile that never quite touches their eyes. And when they do, don't yell, don't threaten, don't rant on Facebook. Just smile, hand them a copy of the survey, and send the invoice. In the end, it wasn't anger that won. It was legacy, patience, and paperwork. This wasn't just a story about cows and clipboards. It was about standing your ground when someone tries to rewrite your history with fine print and fake authority. Clint didn't fight fire with fire. He fought HOA nonsense with facts, maps, and a rent invoice printed in color. And that's the lesson. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to know your rights louder than they know their rules. So whether you're guarding a ranch, a home, or just your peace of mind, stand firm, stay smart, and don't let a Karen convince you your roots don't matter. What would you do if someone tried to charge you for your own land? Tell us in the comments. Smash that like if this story made you laugh and think, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. Land remembers who it belongs to.